This time on Engine Masters, it is my personal quest to make 1,000 horsepower naturally aspirated. This is going to be a very different kind of episode of Engine Masters because we're going to be building a complete engine from scratch. It's going to take us a few months, and we're going to be shooting as we go so that I can show you all of the details of all of the hard parts that are going in this thing. And the other thing that makes it really special is this is about my personal quest to make 1,000 horsepower naturally aspirated. Now, I know these days you can go get an LS engine and throw a turbo on it, and you can make 1,000 horsepower and it's no big deal, but there's no challenge in that. And because I am the flip-flops and big blocks kind of guy, I decided to do it with a naturally aspirated big block Chevy. And this is surprisingly a common combination that we're gonna do here. It's not rocket science, but versus like your standard street engine that many of you are used to, there's a lot of tips and tricks and special features here that I'm gonna show you as we go through it. Now first, I'm gonna talk about what the combination is and why I chose it. This is going to be a 582 cubic inch engine. Now, the reason I went there is, you can build a 598, you can build a 632, you can build a 705 if you feel like it. Really, I took the advice of my good friend Steve Brule, who is the big block master and who's seen these all over the place, and he's like, Freiberger, here's the deal. You want this thing to last, you want to run a wet sump with it instead of dry sump oiling, you do not want a 4,500 stroke in this deal. So the core of it is a 4.375 stroke crank. And the thing is, at RPM, that doesn't dip down into the oil as much. It doesn't get as much of a windage problem, and it's gonna last longer. It's also in a tall deck block, and the reason for that is basically piston ring stability. I'm gonna be able to run a 6.7 inch rod in it and still have a piston that has a 1.3 inch compression height and doesn't even have the pin up into the oil ring. So ring stability is a big part of the reason why we chose that. Now let's talk about the specific components involved, and I have to thank Race Winning Brands, who has helped me out a ton with this because, no lie, this is some very expensive stuff. Starting with this Dart all aluminum tall deck block. Now obviously the aluminum feature of it is gonna save a ton of weight off the nose, but there's a whole lot of other things that are trick about this. The bore in this thing is 4,600, and I have chosen the complete Dart package where they will prep the entire block for you and ship it ready to assemble. So that's a huge help. It's already been decked, it's already been bored and honed, it's already been a line board. This thing is ready to go. It is beef, and I love it. I've wanted an aluminum big block forever, so I'm so happy. Now, the pistons are from Diamond. They match the 4,600 bore in this thing. Now, you'll notice they've got a very small dome on them, and I should point out this is the one custom thing in this entire program. Everything else on the table is directly off the shelf, but I wanted maximum compression, so we're running 14.7 to 1 compression ratio with just a 23 cc dome because the chamber in these cylinder heads that I'll tell you about soon is only 97. A standard big block is closer to 118 to 121. And so with that smaller chamber, you can get more compression with a flatter piston. I also gave Diamond the specs of the camshaft that I want to run, and so they're able to cut the reliefs in it so that it'll match perfectly and I'm not going to have a valve to piston problem. You can see that it has vertical gas ports in it, and the rings in this are 0.43 inch for the first and second, and then it's got a 3mm oil ring. One thing that you got to think about when you're building a serious engine like this that is just not really on the radar of your typical street deal is the piston pin itself. Diamond asked me if I was going to be running a power adder or naturally aspirated. I swore that I was never gonna put nitrous on this thing, and that's probably a lie. And so they were able to step me up to a beefier piston pin. My crank and my connecting rod both came from K1 Technologies. These are probably the most basic parts that you'll find in this engine. A 6.7 inch H-beam connecting rod, and the crankshaft is of course forged, and it's a 4.375 stroke. I've got no other real trickery in this as far as like special shaped counterweights or dual keyways or anything like that. We get into the beef of what I am counting on for the horsepower here, which is the Dart cylinder head. Now this thing thing is like a compromise in between a full race head, like their Big Chief stuff or like Spreadport stuff. It has a altered valve angle. It's 20 degrees on the intake instead of 25, which is stock, or 24, which is common in the aftermarket, but it still takes a conventional big block Chevy intake manifold. So that pattern is identical, but the intake ports are 451 cc's. So this thing's gonna flow big. And we were just lusting after the exhaust port over here, which is gnarly looking. The valves are titanium on the intake and Inconel on the exhaust. A little bit of overkill for what I'm doing, but it's gonna help me RPM. It is a 2,400 intake valve and a 1,800 exhaust. And once again, that 97 cc nice flat chamber for high compression. So that's the bones of what I'm starting with here. And now we're gonna run off and have to assemble the short block. And when I come back and give you the next update, I hope we can talk more specifically about the valve train that's gonna be going in my 582. Now it's 3 months and 1 pandemic later. What I'm gonna show you now is some of the specialized components that are gonna go on the outside of the engine that are a little bit different than your conventional big block Chevy. I'm gonna kick it off with the oiling system. If you saw episode 56 of Engine Masters, you know that we made big horsepower and improved our oil pressure curve with a very trick Moroso oil pan, and that's why these guys are our new best friends for oiling. This pan's actually a little bit different than the one that we used before because it's not two-piece, it's a little bit cheaper. I thought I would end up using a flat dragster pan, but these guys advised that the sumped pan like this actually helps oil control and deceleration. And so this is more of a conventional chassis car type pan. However, there are some differences. First of all, this windage tray is a little more unique than what you might see in a standard street pan, mostly because it's got these dividers in it. This divides the pairs of connecting rods on the throws on the crankshaft. Cylinders 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, 7 and 8. By separating them like this, you get even more oil control. On the oil pump, Moroso makes a bunch of very cool billet pumps. This is not like a regular cast housing that you would see on one of our normal performance buildups. Now, to be honest with you, I don't fully understand what they've got going on in here. I asked them about the oil pumps because they make like 6 or 7 different part numbers on them, and they looked at what I was gonna do as far as clearances on the mains and rods and bearing diameters and RPM, and they picked a specific oil pump for me. I guess my best advice would be, if you're doing something radical like this, call them and get the advice on which pump to use, because there's a bunch of them. Next up, before we get into some hard parts, this is the head gasket that I'm gonna use. This has become pretty typical for a really high performance buildup with a lot of compression or a lot of boost or nitrous. It is what they call an MLS gasket, or multi-layer steel. You can see that there is a solid shim here in the middle, and then there's 2 outer ones that are stamped with the embossments, and then it's all coated with a sealant. Now, the point of this type of gasket is that it's got some springiness to it. Especially in a boost or nitrous application, you can see that the cylinder head really wants to lift off the block and sometimes warp a little bit. And you'll see what we used to call torching the block, which is the head lifts, and often you'll see that the fire from combustion will just go right out the side, and especially on an aluminum block like this, it will just dig a groove. It's like you took, a plasma cutter and just put a big groove in the block. Obviously, I don't want that. And the Cometic MLS gasket is designed to solve that. Now we get into the hard parts, the valve train parts. And this is all a CompCam's program. They are looking at making a package for engines like this. I've mentioned to you before that this is not rocket science what I'm doing here. This is a pretty standard engine package that a lot of bracket racers use. So while it's full race, they're also looking for reliability and durability. And so we've taken a bunch of steps toward that. First of all is in the cam profile itself, which at this point is a custom grind from Comp that eventually you should be able to buy off the shelf. It's aggressive. I'm gonna talk to you about the duration at 50 thousandths tappet lift, and it's gonna sound to you like advertised duration. It is 284 on the intake and 300 on the exhaust. That is a no fooling solid roller camshaft. The lift is above 850 on both lobes, and the lobe separation angle is 114. Other things for durability, the camshaft in this thing is what they call a 55mm cam, meaning that the cam bearing bores in the block are actually larger than a conventional big block Chevy. Sometimes you can do that with actually a needle roller bearing. I've done it with a Babbitt bearing. The whole point is to make the camshaft core a larger diameter so that it does not flex with the high valve spring pressures that we're going to use. It's just an element of beef. The other thing is, the solid roller lifters in this engine are a larger diameter than a conventional big block Chevy. A stock big block Chevy is 843 thousandths round in the bore inside the engine block. These are the Chrysler diameter of 0.904, 904 thousandths of an inch. And so the body of the lifter is physically bigger and the roller wheel is physically bigger, which gives you a number of benefits, a larger axle, but in particular, a different ramp on the camshaft lobe. So again, this is another thing that we told comp cams what we were doing, and it's another element of the package that they're going to be putting together for these engines. And of course, the Dart block had to be custom ordered, bushed for those larger lifter diameters. Now, on a conventional big or small block Chevy or a number of other engines, they have what we call a stud-mounted rocker, this being that stud, which screws into the cylinder head right next to the valve spring and valve. And with that stud, the rocker arm slips over it. And often we will use with this what's called a stud girdle, which is a big piece of aluminum that ties together all of the rocker arm studs on one bank of the engine. The problem is we're dealing with big valves, high valve spring pressures, lots of RPM, and the stud-mounted rocker can still flex around quite a bit in that scenario. So instead, we're going to be using what's called shaft rockers. These happen to be from a company called T&D, which is sold through comp cams, and maybe one day will be part of this package that we're discussing. You can see that with the shaft-mounted rocker, there is a large aluminum brace right here that's going to bolt into the stock stud mounts, and then each rocker is going to mount individually onto that brace. It's called a shaft rocker because you can see it has a shaft running through the middle of it, which is like the axle. And then the rocker arm pivots on that axle. And by doing that, it just removes any flex side to side or up and down that's going to cause deflection, that's going to be a reliability problem, and also reduce lift and duration and things like that. Mostly it's a reliability issue. As far as valve springs, Comp has developed a new spring that is really for longevity. If you've got this thing in like a typical bracket race application, you might be changing valve springs like every 100 passes or something like that. They wanted to go closer to like 400 passes. If you look at the springs that are currently on my Dart heads, you'll see that they're a big, heavy triple spring. This one is only a double, but it's all nicely scienced out and finished to be able to control this massive camshaft and have more reliability. And since, honestly, I'm never gonna rebuild this thing once it goes in a car, I need something like that. The other thing that is a little bit different from what you'd normally see on race engines is that it's got these lightweight tool steel valve spring retainers. What you've got here is titanium, which is pretty typical. Titanium is lighter than steel, so it helps with, overall weight and valve control. The tool steel is nearly as light as titanium, but it's not going to have the wear problems that you can often see with titanium, so that's what we're going to be running there. The other huge question that I get on social media every time I show pictures of this engine is what is going on with the belt drive on the front of the engine? This is a very nice Comp Cams camshaft belt drive. It would serve the same purpose as your typical timing chain set, and often you would upgrade with a double roller, and people have asked me why I didn't use that. There's a whole bunch of reasons. First of all, in something as radical as this with a huge stroke and a lot of displacement, a lot of RPM, a lot of valve spring pressure, they use the belt instead of a chain to reduce the number of harmonics that are transferred from the crankshaft into the cam. How can I actually data log that? I don't know, but it's been common practice for a long, long time. Also, this setup is said to not eat as much power, and it is more reliable than a chain. I have broken timing chains, even double rollers. I have never broken one of these heavy-duty belts. When you install this thing, it has a very trick setup for setting the camshaft end play, but the bigger reason why this is used in race applications is right here, you can go in and loosen up these bolts and you can adjust your camshaft timing. You've seen episodes about how that can affect the power curve. Well, with this, you can be at the track and you can just go in there and move it a couple degrees one way or the other and alter that shape of your power curve. That, and it looks so trick. So anyway, that's the next level of parts we've got going on the 582. Next time you see it, it'll be a long block. And finally, it is all together in one piece. And there's some more trickery to show you. So the 582 is now loaded with a Moroso vacuum pump, which you can see here. You can buy from Moroso all sorts of different versions of this. They can advise you on what's best, including the drive unit. What this does is it works almost like an old school smog pump. There's veins inside it, so that when it spins, it creates a vacuum. And you can see we've got it plumbed to the valve cover here. So the whole crankcase inside the engine is gonna end up pulling about 8 inches of vacuum. And that tends to help piston ring seal, and it also helps with oil control. Now, looking at some of the other accessories here on the top, we've got a 1050 CFM Holley Dominator carburetor. This one is an XP model with really cool features, including the fact that it's aluminum, which has merit. It's significantly lighter than the old zinc models. Now, the other thing I want to point out is that this is not some boutique frou-frou custom tuner magic guy carburetor. That is Holley straight out of the box. Next, we've got this 1-inch carburetor spacer here, which we're gonna test in the episode. We'll show you all about that. The intake manifold is an Edelbrock Super Victor 2 for a tall deck big block like this one. I really want to point out, this manifold is not touched as far as custom porting. It is right out of the box. So now, it all comes down to the moment of truth for me. We're gonna put it on the dyno. We're gonna show you how Brule sort of warms up into tuning and getting the final number for an engine like this. And I'm gonna cross my fingers that it makes more than 1,000 horsepower naturally aspirated. Well, guys, there's a lot of ways to make 1,000 horsepower these days, but I know that you love NA power.
Absolutely.
And big block Chevys.
Oh, my favorite.
He loves big block Chevys, and I want to see your excitement level Freiburger.
I have been waiting for this for a long time. I am super stoked about it. So I have to reveal that Brule is the one who talked me into the single 4-barrel.
Really?
I wanted the tunnel ram. He's like, oh no, it'd be really cool to make the number with a single 4-barrel. So.
Well, because it was going to be too easy with a tunnel ram.
So if it doesn't make it, I'm blaming you.
Okay, I'll accept that.
Oh, wow.
Well, you saw that coming. Why else do you think I would have set that up?
I know, you just really like, phew,
So it's
right
all
on Brule.
Right there.
My engine, my responsibility, I suppose.
Wait, what?
He's really trying to swallow your 582.
Yeah.
What's happening here?
So the goal is 1,000 horsepower here, and Steve ran it enough to make sure it wasn't going to kick a rod. And so we still have timing adjustments, jetting adjustments, and after that, I would like to fiddle around with cam timing, carb spacer, whatever it takes. All right, we'll fire it up. Okay. We'll sit out here anxiously.
I can't wait to see it.
All right, I'm all anxious. This is gonna be our initial baseline to find out what kind of power this thing makes.
Anxiety?
Well, yeah.
Power anxiety or blow-up anxiety?
Oh, power anxiety. I'm not worried about blow-up anxiety. After all this drama, it better make the number by the end of the episode. Yeah, so we're looking at 11.3 to 11.5 to 1 air-fuel ratio. It made 977.6 horsepower at 7,000 RPM, so off my goal there. And we ran the thing through peak torque, which the torque curve is like dead flat. Basically 775 to 3. Yeah. We won't know until we run it all the way through a full sweep. Yeah. Exactly.
What I would do next is put timing in it, because the air-fuel ratio is still very safe. So we can see if it responds to the timing, right, and then we'll look at the carburetor and make some choices there.
And it's my responsibility to set timing because it's my motor. So if it slips to like 42 degrees and the pistons leave the building, then it becomes my fault. So red lines are 32 degrees of timing, black lines are 36 degrees. Does it make you want to put 2 more in it?
I'm hesitant just knowing this cylinder head and combustion chamber, but we've got good gas in it.
Yeah.
So we can go another 2, and I don't think it's going to show much, but then we know, and we can go back.
For the record, right now, 987 horsepower. We think the timing helped, so I'm gonna go tickle 2 degrees into that thing and we'll see if it does better. .38 degrees of ignition timing, at least by my eyeball, says 991.6 horsepowers and 773 pound-feet of torque. We gotta overlay it to make sure that it's like everything that we hope it is.
Well, I am reasonably comfortable saying.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Picked up 6.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a good jump.
And it did that twice in a row.
Exactly.
So it tells me it's maybe not done.
Gotta go there. I mean, 40 degrees of timing would be really hard to believe with something with such a flat chamber and not much of a dome on it. Should be pretty efficient, but we don't know where that timing pointer's lined up.
I will tell you what I would normally do.
Okay.
Is I would not do more timing now. Because when we go do some air-fuel ratio stuff and get it close, the timing might change at 2 or 3 tenths. I would head for air-fuel ratio, get that kind of dialed in, whether it be spacer, jetting, whatever happens there, and then try another degree or so when we're done with some air-fuel. Take the wholesale changes or the biggest changes first, and then just barely pick out.
Well, you're dyno brain, I'm with that.
So, okay.
Yeah, so let's look at the fuel curve and decide what to do there. So the dyno has 2 feed lines for fuel, one of them to the front bowl, one of them to the second bowl, and they both have fuel veins in it. So what Steve's doing is looking at the fuel flow front and rear and deciding where he's going to make his change. And you're seeing that you've got more fuel in the rear right now than in the front, and because we want to lean it out a bit, he's going to take some jetting out of the back, and it should even out the 2 bowls. So before you say it, let Dulcich and I guess how many jets you're going to go. We don't know what's in it right now, but I'm going to guess that you're going to want to take out 4.
I was gonna say 4, but I'm gonna go with 5.
5
and a half.
All right, we're gonna go jet this thing. So Brule has this set that I like to call the barbecue set because that wood handle looks to me like when you get the Weber grill and it comes with the like poker and stuff. And it's the special step on it right there so that it works on this style of jet extension that actually tucks in behind the jet. See, the jet extension is so that when you're on the drag strip and you launch and all the fuel goes to the back of the bowl, it's still picking up fuel. There's 2 kinds. There's a kind that threads into the hole and then the jet threads into that, and this kind where the jet just falls out like that. This jet is, ooh, that's a 94. Interesting. I was worried that it was gonna be like a 96 or a 98. Usually when you have a really big jet, like let's say a 98 in it, you have to make a bigger change because when they approach 100, the changes get less and less sensitive. In other words, if it's 100 to begin with, you might have to change 6 to make it change. But with a 94 in it, we can change 4 and make it change. What was the calling from Brule?
89.
89, so he's gonna move 5.
Yeah.
4 digits.
Yeah.
That was 1,000 plus.
Yeah.
That was the one.
Whew.
I saw those numbers just flying up, like counting
me
up.
too.
That was beautiful.
That was a big jump in power for that jetting change, actually.
Yeah, sometimes you might be surprised.
We were high-fiving each other out here, but I gotta see the data, because if we're wrong, I can't tell you what the collapse in my mood will be if it made 999 on the data.
I am 100% confident we're not gonna ruin your mood.
Okay, good. Yes, we got it. 1,005.9 horsepower, pretty much with out-of-the-box parts on gasoline and a single 4-barrel.
Isn't that amazing?
Yes.
That's why this was so much fun.
Yeah, and it's gonna get better from here, I hope.
Yeah.
There's our curve, 782.1 pound-feet of torque, 1,005.9 horsepower. Look how flat this torque curve is, which is why it makes the power, because the roll-off is not as steep as you would see with something with a worse cylinder head.
You know, we've talked about this percentage thing a number of times. I wanted to show Steve Dulcich kind of what
Okay.
happened. 781, so we'll say what, 78 horsepower would be a 10% drop?
723.
So it's 60.
Wow.
So 60,
So it's
which is
8%.
less than it. Yeah, it's 8%
Yeah.
roughly.
And that's not even with the tricks.
Yeah, and what Steve's talking about here is how much of the torque do you lose from peak torque to peak horsepower, and putting that in percentage terms. Normally with most engines, you'll see 88 to 91%. 91 being a really good engine because it's not dropping off torque that fast. But on this particular engine, we're seeing something in the area of what, 6 or 7% drop off between those two numbers. So
Yeah.
that is an engine that hangs on and continues making power upstairs.
Can we actually look at the change that made on the graph
Absolutely.
of fuel to fuel? Oh, look at that. That is just a jetting change. That's 5 jet sizes in the secondary.
Holy cow.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
Yeah, from 991 to 1,006. I had said to him, he's like, you know, this is gonna pick up to onesies, twosies, threesies. It's not gonna actually hit 4 digits. Wrong.
Some engines are really sensitive to jetting and timing, and other ones just go, I don't care. This one obviously is sensitive to change.
Well, how rich is it? Let's look at what your sensor
where we
actually
are.
tells us. That was a huge change. It's still running 11.9 to 12.0, which normally I think on this we would call good, but what if it actually wants a little less than that?
Yeah.
So intuition is leading us towards not jetting it again, but installing a 1-inch tapered combo carburetor spacer. I'll show you what that's all about. Here's the plan, a 1-inch spacer, we call this a tapered combo. You can see that it is a 4-hole on top, but flip it over and it tapers down to open. So it's got more plenum area. Theoretically, it gives a better drivability, more signal to the booster. We don't know. We're just hoping it makes more power. Charlie Sheen?
Winning!
Let's see by how much. And with the spacer, our new power peak is 1,014.7 horsepower, and we picked up a little bit of torque, 786.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can we look at the overlay and find out how much that spacer actually helped and why? We should look at the AFR as well. Wow. Okay, we're gonna name this engine Mikey, because Mikey likes it. No matter what you do to it, Mikey likes it.
Yeah, I'm amazed at how responsive this thing is to changes.
The red lines here before the spacer, black lines are after, and our reaction is the fact that it picked up everywhere instead of just at the top, and that it's that big of a gain.
I don't know that it changed the AFR that much, and kind of part of the initial thinking was...
It didn't.
Yeah.
Typically the open leans it out,
Yeah.
which I explained to the audience. This time it just didn't. Maybe it's because of that tapered combo design. We don't know, but look at that. Ignore that because that's really not a big change. I mean, that's 2/10 of a ratio right there, which tells you the air-fuel ratio is the same.
This is at a point where I would try the timing again. Since the fuel made a significant difference, go back to 2 degrees.
Man, this is fun just whittling away at the thing. I mean, we're down into just looking at 5, 6, 7 horsepower, but still. I'm gonna go put 2 degrees in this thing.
Whoa.
It didn't hate it.
Whoa.
I'll tell you that. What just happened, Steve?
It made more power, Dave.
Yes, it did. So let's look at the curve, because it liked it again. Wow, 1,020.3 horsepower, 788 pound-feet of torque. We cannot hurt this thing. Let's have a look at what it was before the timing, 38 degrees. Boom.
Ooh.
Yeah, it just keeps growing. It's not even really narrowing. It's happening later, but the
Right.
gap is not narrowing.
That's pure timing.
So right now, we're looking at 1,020.3 horsepower, which is really cool. But you had one last trick up your sleeve.
Actually, VP makes a couple of different oxygenated fuels, and we have used Q16 here on a number of occasions. It's really more prominent in the drag boat racing community than it is in NHRA. It's a little more expensive, and you have to service the engine, maybe drain it between races, that sort of thing. For whatever reason, drag boat guys are willing to. But what I can tell you is what we normally see is normally 2% gain.
So we're gonna go pour in the Q16, or they are while I'm waiting here.
Okay.
Whoa, 1,038.9 horsepower, 797 pound-feet of torque, almost 800.
Yeah.
What a sweet curve this thing makes, too.
Yeah.
Let's overlay it with the gasoline.
Whoa.
Whoa.
Man, that's a lot.
That's huge. And it's everywhere in the curve, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Ooh, and look at that 7,700 RPM. It definitely rolled over there. It's making peak at 74 right now when you actually carry it all the way out.
Yeah.
But man, that's a shrieking big block.
Yes,
Kind of fun, huh?
Yeah, that's totally cool. Am I allowed to call it 1,040?
I'll give you that one. Yeah,
Am I
it's
allowed?
within 1 horsepower.
All right, we have 1,040 horsepower big block.
You know, I'd call it 1,040.
I know you would. It's only 1.1 horsepower away from that. Here's the thing that I've really thought through as I've sort of been through the process of this engine over the past many months is there's a lot of ways to get 1,000 horsepower these days. There's fewer ways to make 1,000 horsepower naturally aspirated. And I think what I've honed in on here is this is the easiest. I've seen 400 cubic inch Clevelands make 1,000 horsepower NA. If you're willing to spend a fortune on oiling, induction, cylinder heads, and 12,000 RPM, you can do it. But this ultimately is not a custom engine. Everything on it is off the shelf. It bolts together a little bit more difficult than a regular engine, but not much.
Yeah, you've got to do some more checking and measuring, valve to piston clearance, those things, just to ensure that you don't have any issues. But realistically, we never left this shop assembling it.
Right. There's no super custom milling. There's no trick porting work.
No.
The heads are right out of the box. That intake is right out of the box. Carburetor. The only thing I recall doing that was super annoying was I had to grind the back of the belt drive cover. But you got to do that every single time you use a belt drive.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're just lucky.
So there's nothing custom on it. This is all off-the-shelf aftermarket parts. And what makes it easy is the 582 cubic inches and the fact that it's the bigger bore and the shorter stroke. Some 582s are like a 4.560 bore and a 4.5 inch stroke, and this has only got a 4.375 stroke, which I think helps with RPM and the oiling.
The oiling issue is the reason I like the shorter strokes. The big strokes in a wet sump get to be kind of problematic.
Yeah.
That's why I love this thing.
Well, if you want big power, the big block Chevy is just the go-to power plant, in my opinion, every time. So, I mean, this just proves it. NA, 1,000 plus horsepower, bolt together combo.
Yep.
Nice
Dart,
job.
K1, Comp Cams, Holley, Moroso, they all make it happen. I don't know if you'll see 1,000 horsepower NA again anytime soon, but if we do it, you will see it on Engine Masters.
Oh. I think it liked it. I know. I just can't contain myself, though, Freiberger.
I know.
You know, honestly, when I'm watching the numbers roll on the dyno screen as we're going through a poll, I'm like, go, go, go.
I know.
Do you do the same thing?
Yeah, and every time I see a number flash, I'm like, oh, it did blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And then we look at the curve, I'm like, oh.